Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. Visual art has long been an important method of expression for the creative among us. For centuries, the artist, the painter, the designer have been mainstays of high culture in communities of every ethnicity. One reason for this is the evocative nature of the artist's contribution. Images can give us insights, broaden our horizons, inspire our creativity, and yes, they can make us feel. A competent painter can translate pigments and brushstrokes into anger or sorrow or joy. A master can make you feel lost in an event you've never even witnessed, subject to all the experiences it holds. It should be no surprise, then, that there are those who express the darker side of our emotional spectrum. A canvas can hold fear and terror, rage, religious anxiety, genetic memory, or even the warped perceptions of madness itself. If you've ever read Stephen King or Lovecraft, you'll be familiar with the trope of the great eldritch being contacting the supersensitive through undefined means. That sensitive person most often being an artist of some kind. Artists have given form to such images for various reasons. Some do therapeutically, some because the images won't leave them be, some because they feel the need to share what's in their heads. But whatever the reason, they all give us scares that we'd be poorer without. Stanisław Beksinski. In the field of theater, there are those actors that people can't name, but always seem to recognize. You know, hey, it's that guy from that movie. If you have an eye for scary art, or hell, if you've ever bought a metal album, you'll feel that same recognition in seeing his art, even though you've probably never seen or tried to pronounce his name. Hell, took me 4 tries to get it right, mostly. Born in Sanek, southern Poland, his childhood and early teens were spent in the throes of World War II. Those experiences and sights are obvious influences in his 30-some-odd years of being what some would call a nightmare artist. His art's been described as no less than Guillermo del Toro as a warning about the fragility of the flesh. Whatever pleasures we know are doomed to perish. Brian Charnley. Born in 1949 in Stockton-on-Tees, he grew up knowing that his mind was not as it should be. Still, even after he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, he began painting images centered on his mental states and any symbology that proceeded therefrom. Especially evident in his self-portraits, he also provided an extensive written explanation that allowed a tracking of his deteriorating mental state and his advancing condition, even his experimentation with various treatments. He kept this up until his suicide in 1991. Laurie Upton. An artist from the age of 4, she has, in her own words, done nothing but drawing. Tiny little details so small she needs a jeweler's loupe to guide her hand on great large canvases. Such clarity and detail explodes in the frightening presence of human darkness. Distension of the human form, whole communities of uncanny protagonists, actions that disgust and dismay, banality spiced with horror and technological monstrosities growing into the world around them. And then there are the skeletons. All the damn skeletons. Despite being a charming, well-spoken, charismatic boomer lady, her work will scare the bejesus out of you. Louis Wayne. This one is a bit of a personal thing for me. You see, I'm a cat person, and Wayne also had a thing for cats. Though he was able to support his mother and sisters as a commission artist after his father's death, with country scenes, landscapes, and animals, his most famous works were depicting an almost animistic series of cats satirizing human behaviors, fashion, and character. Seeing them with their human expressions on felinoid faces almost seems to be a catalog of things that one sees and wants, but can't achieve. Which may have been an issue for Wayne since he was schizophrenic and prone to wild, if not violent, mood swings. He spent most of his later life in and out of asylums, continuing to work with his art all the while. Richard Dad. Another schizophrenic, Dad was an award-winning artist and founding member of an artistic group called The Clique that sought to develop talent of its members by round-robin creation and criticism. His work was known for its realism and near-obsessive detail. His condition first manifested publicly on a trip down the Nile in a bout of quote-unquote possession in which he thought he'd been taken over by none other than the god Osiris. The remainder of that trip was filled with more deific delusion, and when he returned home, his father bore the brunt of his madness, eventually being killed when Richard, believing him to be possessed by the devil himself, slit his throat. He's known to have spent a great amount of time in the infamous Bedlam and Broadmoor, where he painted and drew a great deal, in between outbursts of violence. James Tilly Matthews. Matthews was among the first fully documented cases of paranoid schizophrenia. Specifically, his delusion was that a gang of criminals and spies had constructed a machine that he called the heirloom. That's loom of air, not a thing passed down through a family, with the purpose of tormenting him specifically. His artistic peculiarity was sketching of the machine and his representation of its effects on its human subjects. The Art of Psychopaths. Various serial killers took up the arts while in prison or in psych treatment, be that for therapy, for maintaining some income, or simply to hold on to some measure of fame. Gacy's pogo portraits are dead-eyed views of the face of madness. Henry Lee Lucas, however, proved to be something of a passable landscape painter, and he doesn't really express his malice in his art detectably at all, until you see his portraits. Chilling shit, folks. Charles Ng paints bright underwater scenes that are, nevertheless, predatory in view. The Gainesville Ripper, Dan Rowling, has produced some very striking sketches. Not all crazy-ass murderers prove to have such skills, however. Some killers, like Muller and Manson, produce work on par with an unpracticed grade schooler. And lastly, we have Edvard Munch, or Monk, depending on who you ask. Everyone knows his Geschrei, the scream, but many of his works seem a trifle wrong-looking. When he lost his mother, he had to deal with a deeply depressed and disturbed father who also later died. Further, had to mourn a sister and a brother as well. It's no wonder then that his anxiety and his fear comes through in his slightly off subjects. You'll notice in many of his works that the faces of those painted are just short of sharply captured, as if in a hall of mirrors. Yellow eyes without irises, flat visages add to the off-putting effect in some of his works. It's easy to see how these fears of death and mortality infected his work for the rest of his life. And of course, there are always individual works that give one pause, like Bruegel's Triumph of Death. But that's another list for another day. So don't discount the power of the still image to instill fear in the viewer. In today's age of torture porn and footage or it didn't happen, we can sometimes forget the effects of simply viewing a skillfully executed illustration and the effects that can dig out of us. Do yourself a favor and look into this kind of art, especially if you yourself are of the creative ilk. Stay scary, my wildlings. Get yourself some culture. and make the most of your nights.